A cold night and two desperate souls. The city was drowning in winter's relentless grasp. Snow fell in thick waves, piling onto the already frozen streets, blanketing everything in icy silence. The wind howled through the alleyways, rattling window panes and sending shivers through anyone who dared to walk outside. On a narrow sidewalk, two frail figures huddled together under the dim light of a flickering street lamp. They were twins, Lucas and Lily, just 10 years old, barely clothed for the unforgiving winter night. Their thin, ragged jackets were soaked through, offering little protection against the biting cold. Lucas held his sister close, his small hands rubbing her arms in a desperate attempt to keep her warm. Her face was pale, lips turning a dangerous shade of blue, and her breath came in weak, shuddering gasps. "Lily," he whispered, nudging her gently, "stay awake. We can't sleep, okay? We have to stay awake." Lily's eyelids fluttered open, her brown eyes filled with exhaustion. "I'm trying, Lucas. But, it's so cold." Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that help was coming, but he knew better. They had been on the streets for weeks now, ever since their foster home burned down in an electrical fire. With no family and nowhere to go, they had been left to fend for themselves. People passed by them without so much as a second glance. Cars sped past, their bright headlights cutting through the darkness, but none slowed down. It had been 2 days since they last had a proper meal. Lucas had tried asking for help before, knocking on doors, pleading with shop owners, but people either ignored them or turned them away with disgusted looks. But now, as he looked up, his eyes landed on something different. A house, no, a mansion. It was the largest, most beautiful home on the entire street. Beyond its tall iron gates, golden lights spilled out from the windows, glowing warmly against the cold. Christmas decorations twinkled along the balcony, and through the glass doors, a giant Christmas tree stood proudly in the center of a grand hall. It was decorated with expensive ornaments, wrapped gifts piled underneath it, untouched by the outside world's suffering. Lucas felt a strange sense of hope spark within him. Maybe the people inside would help. Maybe, just this once, someone would care. He turned to Lily. "Come on, we have to try." Lily nodded weakly, and together, they stumbled toward the gate. A nameplate glistened on the gatepost, illuminated by golden lights. Ethan Sterling. Lucas hesitated for a moment. The name was familiar, everyone in the city knew it. Ethan Sterling was one of the richest men in the country, a real estate tycoon who owned half the city. But he was also known for something else. His heart was as cold as the winter air. Rumors swirled about his ruthless business tactics, his lack of compassion, and his belief that the poor were responsible for their own suffering. The newspapers had once called him the stone-hearted billionaire. Lucas swallowed his fear. They had no choice. With trembling fingers, he reached up and pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed through the enormous property. For a long moment, nothing happened. The twins stood there, shivering, their breath forming small white clouds in the air. Then, finally, the heavy front door creaked open. A butler appeared, dressed in a crisp black suit. He was tall, with sharp features and a stern gaze that immediately made Lucas feel small. The butler's eyes swept over them, and his expression darkened. "What do you want?" His voice was clipped, impatient. Lucas straightened his back, summoning the last of his courage. "Please, sir, my sister and I, we just need a little warmth. Just for a while. We're so cold, and we have nowhere else to go." The butler's lips thinned. He stepped forward as if to push them back. "This is private property. You have no business being here." "Please," Lucas begged, his voice cracking. "We don't need much. Just a warm place to sit for a little while. We won't cause any trouble." Lily wobbled on her feet, her body barely able to keep standing. The butler glanced at her with mild concern, but it was quickly replaced with indifference. He shook his head. "I'm afraid I must ask you to leave." He reached for the gate, preparing to close it. But then, a new voice rang out from inside the mansion. "Who is at the door, Mason?" It was deep, authoritative, and cold. The butler stiffened, his posture immediately straightening. "Just a couple of beggars, sir. I was just sending them on their way." A moment later, a man stepped into view. Ethan Sterling. Even in the dim lighting, the billionaire's presence was unmistakable. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, with sharp, piercing eyes that missed nothing. His expression was unreadable as he gazed down at the two children shivering before him. Lucas met his gaze, his heart pounding. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, Ethan sighed and turned away. "Get rid of them." Lucas felt his heart sink. The butler nodded and stepped forward. "You heard him. Leave. Now." Lucas clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, to beg, but he knew it wouldn't matter. As he turned to go, Lily suddenly wobbled and collapsed to the ground. "Lily!" Lucas cried, dropping to his knees beside her. He shook her shoulders frantically, but she didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, her skin frighteningly cold. Panic surged through him. "Please, she's not okay. She needs help." Ethan hesitated, his eyes flicking to the unconscious girl. For a brief moment, something flashed in his gaze. An old memory. A wound he had long buried. Then, with a quiet sigh, he spoke. "Mason, bring them inside." The butler's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly obeyed. Lucas barely had time to process what had just happened before strong arms lifted his sister. The warmth of the mansion's golden lights washed over them as they stepped through the doors. Lucas clutched Lily's cold hand, whispering, "Hold on, Lily. We're safe now." But what he didn't know was that stepping into Ethan Sterling's house would change their lives forever. The stone-hearted billionaire's dilemma. The grand doors of the Sterling estate swung open, revealing a mansion that looked like something straight out of a dream. Golden chandeliers dangled from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm glow across the polished marble floors. A fireplace crackled in the distance, filling the air with the comforting scent of burning wood. Rich Persian rugs covered the floors, and exquisite artwork lined the walls, each piece more expensive than anything Lucas had ever seen. It was a world apart from the cold, harsh reality outside. Yet, despite the mansion's grandeur, an eerie stillness hung in the air. There was no warmth in its beauty, only emptiness. Lucas barely noticed. His entire focus was on Lily, who lay unconscious in the butler's arms, her small frame limp and dangerously cold. The butler, Mason, hesitated in the doorway. "Sir, are you sure?" "Take her to the guest room and call the doctor immediately," Ethan Sterling interrupted, his voice sharp but controlled. Mason blinked, clearly surprised, but nodded and hurried upstairs. Lucas watched helplessly as his sister disappeared down the hallway. His heart pounded. "Will she be okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned to him, his piercing gaze unreadable. "That depends on whether she gets warm in time." Lucas clenched his fists. That wasn't an answer. The billionaire studied the boy before him. Lucas was small for his age, his clothes soaked through and tattered. His dark hair was matted, and his cheeks were gaunt, evidence of weeks, maybe months, of malnutrition. Ethan sighed. He had spent years avoiding anything remotely resembling kindness. Compassion was a weakness, and weakness was what had ruined his own past. But now, these two children had forced their way into his perfectly controlled life. And he hated it. "Come with me," Ethan said at last, turning on his heel. Lucas hesitated before following. They walked through the sprawling mansion, past opulent sitting rooms and glittering staircases. Despite the warmth inside, Lucas still felt small, unwelcome. Ethan led him into a dimly lit study, where a roaring fire bathed the room in a golden glow. A massive bookshelf stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes bound in deep brown leather. A dark oak desk sat at the center, stacked neatly with documents. Ethan motioned toward a chair near the fire. "Sit." Lucas hesitated but obeyed, letting the warmth seep into his frozen skin. His fingers ached as they defrosted, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed with worry for Lily. Ethan leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "Start talking." Lucas blinked. "About what? Who are you? And why were you out in the cold?" Lucas looked down, twisting his fingers. No one had cared about their story before. Why would this man be any different? But something about Ethan's gaze, cold, yet expectant, made him speak. "Our foster home burned down," he said quietly. "We were in the system. But, after the fire, there wasn't anywhere for us to go." Ethan's expression remained impassive. "No extended family?" Lucas shook his head. "None that wanted us." Ethan exhaled slowly. He wasn't unfamiliar with the cruelty of the world. He had seen it firsthand, he had lived it. But he wasn't in the business of charity. "How long have you been on the streets?" 3 weeks, Lucas admitted. "Sometimes we found places to stay. But they never lasted." Ethan studied the boy, his sharp eyes noting every detail, the exhaustion in his voice, the quiet resilience in his posture. He was young but carried himself like someone far older, someone who had learned too soon that life was unfair. It was a familiar sight. Too familiar. A silence stretched between them, the only sound being the crackling of the fire. Then, the door swung open. Mason stepped inside, his usual stoic expression tinged with something close to concern. "The doctor has arrived. He's with the girl now." Lucas shot to his feet. "Can I see her?" Ethan gestured for Mason to lead him. Lucas rushed out, disappearing down the hallway. Mason lingered, turning back to Ethan. "Sir, if I may." "You may not," Ethan interrupted, already knowing what Mason was about to say. The butler's lips pressed into a thin line. "These children. They are not my responsibility," Ethan said flatly. Mason hesitated. "And yet, you let them in." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had been asking himself the same thing. But there was something about the boy. Something about the way he held himself, the way he protected his sister at all costs. Ethan had once been that boy. With a sigh, he dismissed Mason with a wave of his hand. "For now, we make sure the girl survives. That's all." Mason bowed slightly and left. Ethan turned to the fire, his thoughts swirling. He had spent years building walls around himself. Years convincing himself that kindness was a liability. And yet, 2 starving children had just walked through his door. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to do next. The fractured past and the uncertain future. Lucas ran through the long, gleaming hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He barely registered the grandeur around him. The towering paintings, the sparkling chandeliers, the luxurious carpets that muffled his hurried footsteps. None of it mattered. Only Lily did. As he reached the guest room, the heavy door was already ajar. He slipped inside, barely aware of the warmth of the fireplace crackling in the corner. His eyes went straight to the massive canopy bed in the center of the room, where his sister lay, wrapped in thick blankets. A doctor, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses and a kind but serious expression, was checking Lily's pulse. Mason, the butler, stood nearby, arms crossed, watching closely. Lucas hesitated at the doorway. "Is she?" The doctor turned to him, his expression unreadable at first. Then, with a small nod, he spoke. She's stable. Her body temperature was dangerously low, but we managed to warm her in time. She needs rest and proper nourishment, but she should recover. Lucas felt the breath he hadn't realized he was holding escape in a shaky exhale. Relief washed over him so forcefully that his knees nearly buckled. He moved to the bed, taking Lily's small, delicate hand in his own. She was still pale, her blonde curls damp with sweat, but her breathing was steady. For the first time in weeks, Lucas felt something close to hope. Mason cleared his throat. We've arranged for a hot meal to be sent up. You should eat too. Lucas hesitated. His stomach ached from hunger, but he didn't want to leave Lily's side. As if reading his mind, Mason added, "You can eat here. I'll have it brought to you." Lucas nodded gratefully. The doctor gathered his bag and turned to Mason. "She'll need monitoring through the night, but I don't anticipate any complications. Keep her warm and hydrated. If she worsens, call me immediately." Mason nodded. "Of course, Dr. Reeves." With that, the doctor left. Lucas gently squeezed Lily's hand, whispering, "We're safe now." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Were they really? Would Ethan Sterling, a man as powerful and seemingly heartless as the world claimed, really let them stay? Lucas had no answers. But for now, all he could do was be grateful that his sister was alive. A man haunted by shadows. Downstairs, Ethan Sterling stood in his vast, dimly lit study, a glass of whiskey in hand. He stared at the fire, lost in thought. He hadn't planned for this. Hadn't planned for two freezing children to show up at his doorstep, forcing him to face ghosts he had buried long ago. Lucas. That boy reminded him too much of himself. The way he stood protectively over his sister. The defiance in his eyes, the way he refused to beg despite having nothing. It was a mirror Ethan had no desire to look into. Because once upon a time, Ethan Sterling had been a boy just like Lucas. Alone. Desperate. Cold. He had clawed his way out of the gutter with nothing but sheer will and ruthlessness, learning the hard way that kindness got you nowhere. That trusting people only led to pain. And now, here he was, one of the richest, most powerful men in the city. Untouchable. Unmoved. Or at least, he had been. Until tonight. Until two starving children had shattered his carefully constructed world. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Mason entered, his expression calm but knowing. He had been with Ethan for years, long enough to understand his moods. "They're settled in," Mason said simply. "The boy is staying with the girl." Ethan took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Good." Mason hesitated. "Sir, if I may, what do you intend to do with them?" Ethan's grip on his glass tightened. That was the question, wasn't it? "I don't know," he admitted at last. Mason arched a brow. "That's unlike you." Ethan scowled. "Watch yourself." But Mason wasn't intimidated. He had seen Ethan at his worst and knew him better than most. "You let them in," Mason continued, stepping closer. "And not just into your house, but into your carefully guarded world. That means something." Ethan set his glass down with a quiet clink. "Don't read into it, Mason." Mason didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked toward the window, where snow continued to fall in thick, silent waves. "They remind you of something," he said at last. "Or someone." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Enough." Mason nodded but didn't look convinced. After a long pause, he turned to leave. "I'll have a room prepared for the boy. If they're staying, they'll need proper accommodations." Ethan didn't stop him. But he also didn't confirm that the children were staying. Because he didn't know the answer himself. A brother's fear. Upstairs, Lucas sat by Lily's bedside, eating the hot soup Mason had sent up. The warmth of the broth eased the ache in his stomach, but it did little to settle his mind. What would happen now? Would Ethan throw them out tomorrow? Would he send them to another foster home? Lucas had spent the last 3 weeks surviving on instinct, doing whatever it took to keep himself and Lily alive. But now, for the first time in a long time, he had no plan. No escape route. No control. And that terrified him. Lily stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open. Lucas immediately set his bowl down and leaned closer. Lily? She blinked up at him, confusion clouding her blue eyes. Where are we? Lucas smiled, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. Some rich guy's house. She frowned. Rich guy? Lucas nodded. His name's Ethan Sterling. He let us in. Lily's lips parted in surprise. Why? That was the question, wasn't it? Lucas shook his head. I don't know. But for now, we're safe. Lily seemed to accept that. She closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her back into sleep. Lucas stayed by her side, staring at the flickering candle on the nightstand. He had a feeling that Ethan Sterling wasn't a man who did things out of kindness. And that scared him. Because if there was one thing he had learned in his short, difficult life, nothing came without a price. Secrets beneath the surface. Lucas barely slept that night. The luxurious bed beneath him, far softer than anything he had ever known, felt foreign. Too comfortable. Too unreal. He kept expecting to wake up in the alleyway, the bitter cold biting at his fingers, the distant wail of sirens echoing in the night. But every time he opened his eyes, he was still there, in the grand estate of Ethan Sterling. His sister was still breathing beside him, warm and safe. The soft glow of the fireplace flickered against the walls, casting dancing shadows. He was safe. For now. And yet, he couldn't shake the unease in his chest. He didn't trust Ethan. Wealthy men never did anything without a reason. Lucas had learned that early in life, people like Ethan Sterling didn't help others without expecting something in return. So what did he want? A morning of uncertainty. When the first rays of dawn peeked through the heavy curtains, Lucas sat up, stretching stiff muscles. Lily still slept soundly, her small body barely stirring beneath the mountain of blankets. She looked peaceful. It had been so long since he had seen her like this. A knock at the door made him tense instantly, instincts kicking in. He was on his feet before the second knock, heart pounding. The door cracked open, revealing Mason. "Good morning," the butler said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Breakfast is ready." Lucas frowned. "For us?" Mason gave a single nod. "Mr. Sterling insists." Lucas hesitated. His stomach still ached from the hunger of the past weeks, but he didn't trust this generosity. Still, he had no choice. He glanced at Lily, making sure she was still sleeping before he followed Mason out of the room. The millionaire's dining table. Lucas felt out of place the moment he stepped into the massive dining hall. The table stretched across the room, lined with golden candle holders and intricate plates. A chandelier hung above, its crystals gleaming in the morning sunlight. And at the far end of the table sat Ethan Sterling. The man barely looked up as Lucas entered, swirling the coffee in his cup with slow, deliberate movements. Lucas hesitated. Mason gestured for him to sit. The chair felt too big, the velvet cushion too soft. Lucas sat stiffly, his hands curled into fists on his lap. A plate was placed in front of him, eggs, toast, bacon, and fresh fruit. His mouth watered. But he didn't touch it. Ethan finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the silence. "Go ahead. Eat." Lucas didn't move. What do you want? Ethan lifted an eyebrow. Excuse me? Lucas held his ground. Rich people don't help for free. So what do you want from us? Mason, who had been standing nearby, stiffened slightly, as if expecting Ethan to lash out. But Ethan only leaned back in his chair, studying Lucas with unreadable eyes. You're smart, he mused. Suspicious. That's good. That's how you survive. Lucas didn't answer. Ethan set his coffee cup down, fingers drumming against the table. I don't want anything from you. If I did, you'd know it. Lucas wasn't convinced. Then why help us? Ethan's gaze darkened, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Because once upon a time, someone helped me. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lucas wanted to ask more, but something in Ethan's expression warned him not to push. So instead, he picked up his fork and started eating. A past buried in ashes. Ethan watched the boy eat, his face unreadable. He saw himself in Lucas. The same sharp wariness. The same hunger, not just for food, but for control. Ethan had been that boy once. Alone. Desperate. Fighting for every scrap of dignity in a world that wanted to break him. And yet, against all odds, he had survived. He had risen. He had become one of the most powerful men in the city. But at what cost? He had spent years burying his past, locking away the boy he used to be. Until last night. Until 2 freezing children had shattered his walls. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had no place for softness in his life. No room for charity. And yet, here he was. For the first time in years, he found himself standing at a crossroads. One path led to the life he had built, untouchable, ruthless, alone. The other. He wasn't sure where it led. But something deep inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was worth finding out. Lucas's hidden fears. After breakfast, Lucas wandered the halls of the mansion, his mind racing. He didn't trust Ethan Sterling. But he couldn't deny the truth, his sister was safe. Warm. For now. But how long would it last? Lucas wasn't foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. People changed their minds. Promises were broken. And when that happened, he needed to be ready. He needed a plan. As he turned a corner, he nearly bumped into Mason. The butler studied him for a moment before speaking. You're looking for an exit. Lucas tensed. Mason shook his head, cutting him off. I understand. But let me give you some advice, boy. Not every hand extended to you is waiting to strike. Lucas narrowed his eyes. I'll believe that when I see it. Mason sighed but didn't push further. Instead, he simply said, Mr. Sterling is not an easy man to understand. But he is not as heartless as he wants the world to believe. Lucas didn't respond. Because in his world, kindness was the most dangerous lie of all. Ethan's decision. That night, Ethan stood by the window of his study, watching the snow fall. Mason entered quietly, waiting. Ethan didn't turn around as he spoke. They can stay. Mason gave a small nod. I thought you'd say that. Ethan exhaled, closing his eyes. He didn't know what he was doing. But for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. A past that refuses to stay buried. The storm grows stronger. Outside the mansion, the storm had only grown fiercer. Snow blanketed the world in an unforgiving white, howling winds rattling against the windows. The once beautiful winter scenery had turned into an unrelenting force, cutting off roads and burying cars beneath thick layers of ice. Lucas stood by the window, watching. He wasn't sure why, but the storm unsettled him. Maybe because it reminded him of how fragile his situation was. This house, this warmth, this safety, it wasn't his. It belonged to Ethan Sterling, and he knew all too well that things like this could be taken away in an instant. A part of him still wanted to run. But where? Even if he took Lily and escaped, they had nowhere to go. And that truth burned more than the cold ever had. Lily's changing world. Lily, however, seemed to be adjusting in a way Lucas could never allow himself to. She had woken up earlier that morning with a rare smile, stretching like a cat beneath the heavy blankets. "Lucas," she had whispered, her voice filled with something close to wonder. "I had a dream that we were warm forever." Lucas hadn't responded. He couldn't bring himself to. Now, as he turned from the window, he found her curled up in one of the oversized chairs in the library, a thick book in her hands. The mansion had a library. A real one. She had never seen so many books before. Lucas approached cautiously. "You're really reading that?" Lily grinned up at him. "I'm trying. It's kind of hard, but Mason said I could pick any book I wanted." Lucas frowned. "Mason? He's nice," Lily said simply. "I like him." Lucas felt unease settle in his chest. He didn't like how easily Lily trusted people. Especially people like Mason. Especially people like Ethan. An invitation to the unknown. A few hours later, Mason appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you," he said. Lucas exchanged a glance with Lily before standing. "Just me?" he asked. Mason nodded. "Just you." Lucas hesitated but followed. They walked in silence, the walls of the mansion towering around him like something out of a dream. Everything here felt too grand, too unreal. Finally, they stopped in front of two massive double doors. Mason opened them without knocking. Inside, Ethan sat behind an oak desk, his gaze unreadable. The room smelled of old books and expensive leather, and the glow of a fire flickered against the dark wood walls. Lucas stepped inside warily. Mason closed the doors behind him, leaving them alone. Ethan's proposition. Ethan didn't speak at first. He simply studied Lucas, his fingers steepled together. "You don't trust me," he finally said. Lucas stiffened but didn't deny it. Ethan gave a small, humorless smirk. "Good. Trust is expensive." Lucas clenched his fists. "Why am I here?" Ethan leaned back. "Because I have a question for you." Lucas didn't respond. Ethan continued, his voice slow, deliberate. "Do you want to keep running?" Lucas's breath caught. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "Because that's what you've been doing, isn't it? Running. Surviving. Getting through each day, always waiting for the next disaster." Lucas swallowed hard. Ethan leaned forward. "But what if I told you there's another way?" Lucas felt his pulse hammering. "What do you mean?" Ethan exhaled. "I mean, I can help you. Not just by giving you food or shelter, but by giving you something real. A future." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "Why would you do that?" Ethan's expression darkened slightly. "Because someone once did the same for me." Lucas hesitated. "And what happened to them?" A flicker of something unreadable crossed Ethan's face. "They died." The room fell into silence. Lucas felt his stomach twist. "I don't need your pity," he said, his voice tight. Ethan's lips curled into something between a smirk and a frown. "Good. Because I'm not offering it. A choice to make." Ethan stood up, walking around the desk until he was directly in front of Lucas. "You're smart," he said. "And you have the kind of instincts that can't be taught." Lucas tensed. Ethan crossed his arms. "I built my life from nothing. No handouts, no safety net. I learned the rules of the world the hard way. And I see that same fight in you. Lucas stayed silent. Ethan tilted his head. I'm offering you something, Lucas. A chance to learn how to survive in a way that isn't just scraping by. A way to win. Lucas's chest tightened. He wanted to say no. He wanted to walk away. But deep down, a part of him whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was his only chance. Ethan held his gaze. Think about it. Lucas turned, walking toward the door. But before he left, Ethan spoke one last time. If you say yes, you'll never have to run again. Lucas didn't look back. But his hands trembled as he closed the door behind him. A quiet night, a storm inside. Lucas couldn't sleep. Ethan's words kept replaying in his mind, over and over. Could he really trust this? Could he risk believing in something more than just survival? He glanced at Lily, her face peaceful in sleep. He had promised to protect her. But was walking away from this offer really the best way to do that? The storm outside roared on, but inside, the real battle was only beginning. And for the first time, Lucas had no idea what to do. The road to forever. A restless night, a heavy decision. Lucas lay awake long after the fire had dimmed to embers. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood settling against the winter wind. Ethan's words wouldn't leave his mind. If you say yes, you'll never have to run again. Could it really be that simple? He had spent his life believing safety was a lie, something temporary that could be snatched away the moment he let his guard down. But now, here he was, being offered a lifeline, and for the first time, he had the power to choose. Lucas sat up, glancing across the dimly lit room where Lily slept soundly beneath thick blankets. She looked so small. So fragile. She deserved more than this life of uncertainty. And deep down, Lucas knew, he couldn't do it alone. A conversation in the dark. He found Ethan in the study, staring into the dying fire as if lost in his own thoughts. The dim glow cast shadows across his face, making him look older, wearier. Lucas hesitated, then finally spoke. I need to know something, he said quietly. Ethan turned his gaze toward him, waiting. Why? Lucas asked. Why do you care? Why help us? For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair. Because once upon a time, I was you. Lucas frowned. Ethan glanced down at his hands, tracing the lines of an old scar along his palm. I grew up on the streets, he admitted. No family. No safety. Just the next fight, the next meal, the next cold night trying to survive. Lucas stiffened. He hadn't expected that. Ethan exhaled. But someone saved me. Took me in when I didn't deserve it. And now, I'm doing the same. Lucas swallowed hard. He wanted to believe him. He really did. But trust was a dangerous thing. Still, something about Ethan's words settled deep within him, stirring something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to hope. The turning point. The next morning, Lily ran into Lucas's arms, her face glowing with excitement. Lucas. Did you see? Mr. Sterling said I can go to school. Lucas froze. School, he repeated. Lily nodded eagerly. I always wanted to go. And guess what? They have art classes. Lucas looked up sharply. Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Lucas's heart pounded. This was too much. Too real. You had no right, Lucas snapped, his voice sharp. Ethan's expression didn't waver. She deserves more. Lucas clenched his fists. And what if this all falls apart? What if you change your mind? What if one day, you decide we're not worth it. Ethan stepped forward. Then I suggest you make sure that doesn't happen. Lucas's breath hitched. Ethan held his gaze, unwavering. I'm not offering charity, Lucas. I'm offering a future. But if you want to be a part of it, you have to fight for it. Lucas's mind swirled with doubt, fear, and something else, something dangerously close to hope. Could he do this? Could he believe in something more? Lily tugged at his sleeve. Lucas, she whispered, her voice small. Can we stay? Lucas looked down at her wide, hopeful eyes. And in that moment, the choice became clear. He wasn't doing this for himself. He was doing it for her. For the first time in his life, he chose to stop running. He chose to believe. Lucas took a deep breath, turned to Ethan, and nodded. Okay, he said. We'll stay. And just like that, their world changed forever. Epilogue, a life rebuilt. Weeks turned into months. Lucas slowly adjusted to a life he never imagined, one with stability, purpose, and, most of all, family. He trained under Ethan, learning skills that would secure his future. Lily started school, her laughter filling the halls of the mansion like sunlight after a storm. For the first time, they weren't just surviving. They were living. And as Lucas stood at the window one evening, watching the snowfall with a cup of warm tea in his hands, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. He was ready for it.